You've been a core architect on some high impact infrastructure, from leading Fraxlend and other lending protocols at Frax Finance to co-founding Agora and building AUSD. How has your experience with deeply composable financial systems influenced how you think about security tooling and defense in depth?
Uh, so I'd say the biggest thing is just the general assumption that you should be working off of, which is every external interaction is sort of malicious, or they may become malicious at some point in the future, right? Um, I think the most relevant thing for me today, and really that your system shouldn't rely on any security guarantees you can't build yourself, I guess maybe. Um, I would say maybe like the most relevant thing recently I've been thinking about is like bridging, right? So, I have this like sort of metric I use internally to talk about the maturity of projects, but it's kind of this, I call it like a dollar day. So $1 day is, you secured $1 for one day. So, the bigger that number, the more trustworthy the code is. But, and we can probably get into this later, I think things are really shifting now in the ability for people to find weird bugs with AI. And so it just calls back into the idea that it doesn't matter, you don't know the future. Uh, any external interaction should be considered malicious and, thinking about how you build that stuff, right? So at every layer, I'm a very big fan of reducing complexity in general to fit everything in a single contract. Um, People complain a lot about contract limit sizes, and I always say that's a skill issue. If you can't fit it into the contract size, like it's too complex. Um, Obviously, that's a bit of a joke, but like I think in general, keeping your system simple, owning the security of every piece yourself is sort of how I think about it the most, I'd say.
At crypto scale, risk services aren't just code bugs. They live at the intersection of economic design, Oracle feeds, liquidity incentives, and composability. How do you approach modeling and defending against those economic protocol risks? And
Mhm.
what have you found to be most effective in your experience?
Yeah, so I think like this is actually something I think a lot of people get wrong in business and in crypto, and I phrased it in, it's a bit of game theory, but like people will talk about their second order effects. I do one thing and then what happens, and I very rarely do you meet people who just you have to take it to the end, right? Everything you like the market takes it to the end. How's that? Right? They go to the ninth order, the 10th order, the 11th, like it goes forever. And the whole point is that you have to do that too. When you're thinking about how a real market, like a dark forest, whatever it is, right, is going to actually react to the incentives that you put together. I think that to give like more concrete examples, there are questions about like how much power can a governance token have when the market cap is not securing is smaller than the budget or like the balance sheet that you're securing, right? Like can you of course you have to think about then like economic takeover and how do you prevent that and those types of things. That's like one example. I think oracles are another one where there's this big debate around fixed price oracles or spot oracles or TWAP and all that other stuff. And I think you in those instances, I think my mindset has shifted a little bit on these. I used to be very much against the fixed price oracles in general. I think I saw there's a lot of issues with that. However, I think that's a bit of what do you want? What do I want to call it? Like your brain reaches for like the most elegant solution, but I think like a more pragmatic solution is actually more important here. So basically the question is what's more likely to happen? Um, a flash crash or a like problem with a fixed oracle, right? And I think the reality is, and what we've seen in the data, I think this is maybe the most important thing, is that it's much more likely for a flash crash to be wrong than to be right. And as a result, maybe it makes more sense to go towards like more of a fixed price oracle. And I think this is something that's difficult for engineers to grasp sometimes because you want it to be a different way, right? Like the market and the data may suggest something that doesn't feel as elegant or feel more like right in your bones, but you have to sort of ground. Like, yeah, these economic protocol risks, like it's all game theory. It's human behavior, it's the real world, and you have to just know that and go into it. And so you can do things like put guardrails, right? So an oracle can never go to below 50% of like this hard-coded value. There are trade-offs to that, right? But I think you have to be honest about the trade-offs more than you need to feel right. That makes sense. So like if you're a liquid staking token, maybe you put in some buffers, right? Like that feels gross, right? Because it's like, centralized or whatever. The truth is, what are the chances that the Oracle actually needs to drop below like 25% of a peg, right? Like there's just, and if that's happening, everyone's losing money anyway, right? Like it's not going to be an Oracle manipulation, right? Like it's just statistically more likely that um, it's an Oracle manipulation in that case than it is a true pricing. And like those are the kind of trade-offs I think that people really have to think about when when it's like it's just game theory, it's human behavior, and there's no guardrails because the code is not law, but execution law.
In the recent security dinner that we had you at, and the namesake of this podcast, the security table, one of the things that you said that really stood out to me was that you embed, presumably in all the organizations you've been in, but especially now at Agora, security as a culture. And one of the ways you described that was like you want to implement every single layer of security that you can imagine you could, and that's the only way you can sort of sleep at night. You've done enough if you've done everything you can sort of fathomably do.
Yeah.
What are the key cultural or organizational practices that you encourage in engineering teams that help make that philosophy real in
Mhm.
your day-to-day work?
Yeah. I mean, I think the most important thing, like culture starts at the top, right? So the most important thing is I follow security practices, even the ones that are painful and annoying. There's this joke, like I require like 2 lines of verification before I sign something, right? It doesn't matter, like unless I'm talking to you in person, right? I verify and I make sure the people I'm working with also are doing that, right? I think like we yeah, it starts at the top. The culture starts at the top, and I think the number one thing is set an example. I think the other piece is um just saying it again and again, right? Like and I mean I say it a lot to people. We live it. I talk a lot about, okay, like you should be on your guard. Here are the things to look out for. Like, we were sharing recently I was sharing like a prompt injection attack thing that I saw online, like constantly reminding people about how they use different tools and what the attack surface area is. I think it's also, like we have a dedicated CISO here, which is a bit early for someone our stage, but we knew from like the beginning this was important. I think it's also giving people the right tools that they need, right? So we're very much, provide YubiKeys to everybody. We provide all of this stuff. So I think it's just like actually living it, setting an example, reminding people again and again that this is happening. And then it's also reminding people, I think in a lot of places, shipping speed becomes paramount. And of course it's paramount here, but I reiterate that it's sort of never acceptable to break the rules, and that's fireable, right? Like, you know, people using Claude Code, I've made it very clear, like you shouldn't be using dangerously skip permissions. Like that's, and if you don't, and if if you can't follow these guidelines, like you don't have a job here, right? Like it's not a joke, it's a serious thing. We take it seriously. We work really hard to make sure that security best practices are part of the routine and they're seamless, right? I have a chat with security a lot about how we can maintain really high levels of discipline while moving quickly. And that requires extra work, it requires extra resources, but I think for us, it's like an easy choice to invest in. So those are kind of the things that come to mind for me.
Looking at the teams that you've worked with from early DeFi to now stablecoins and beyond, what's one common evolution that you see in how teams mature their security stack as they go from prototype to real world deployment?
Um, that's sort of an interesting one. I'd say they layer things. I mean, the places I have really seen the evolution are mostly Frax and Agora. And I would say both places had a very good commitment to security and again, it sort of starts at the top. At Frax, there was never an issue if you wanted to have another audit, right? Like it was never, and like audits were taken really seriously. One thing that I basically said at some point to the team was like, we should be striving for no ever like any highs or criticals, right? Like you've failed your job if there's a higher critical. Like security is your responsibility, number one, right? It's not, and even at Agora, we do, of course, like third-party pen testing and cybersecurity audits, but like security is our responsibility. I think that ownership of security is probably something I've seen at both places where in some companies, I think this happens too with sort of infrastructure or DevOps sometimes at big companies where that's not my problem. I just do my stuff. There's a bunch of tools that prevent me from leaking PII or doing something dumb, and it's fine. I don't ever think about security. I think, at least in the places I've been, that's a big part of it. It's just like owning it, getting more resources, and then building it into the workflow, right? So, like I said before, and the same thing here at Agora. If there's a high or a critical in an audit, like it's a big fuck up. And we own security. Security is our responsibility. And if we need tools to do that, we get them and we use them, right? I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Okay, and now time for the final course. What is your security hot take? What do you think people are still getting wrong out there in security and especially in digital assets?
Um, I don't know if this is a hot take, right? But I would say that I see a lot of people making jokes that AI tools cannot provide security reviews, which I think is ridiculous. I've seen a lot of interesting things from AI tools. I'd say like that's one which, given the host of the podcast, I don't know if that's super hot take, but I do see that a lot, and I think it's sort of hilarious when people say that. I would say that the other thing I see just too much complexity, right? And I would actually say too much speed and too much trust in auditors in general, right? Like I think we've seen this where protocols that are audited a bunch of times are hacked, and it's I say to my teams always, this is the most important thing we do. This is never to be rushed. No one like you should not push the button unless you're triple checking and you're super sure. We don't rush these processes. We do this right. There's no penalty for delaying it. Because if you get it wrong, it's like the whole business, right? So I think, my hot take is there's way too much complexity in smart contract development and probably way too much speed as well. And I would also say that just, trusting the auditors are human too, AI or otherwise, right? And if you embed so much surface area and complexity into what you're building, something will fall through. And so that's probably my biggest hot take is you don't need to increase the contract limit size.